How do the Carolina Hurricanes feel about trading for K'Andre Miller? And what do we know about the recently acquired Scott Morrow? We find out in a very special crossover edition with Zach Martin of Locked On Canes.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1350 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So yeah, special crossover edition, the everydayers. You guys know that we do these from time to time. We actually just did a crossover episode with Eddie Garcia of Locked On Kings. Asked Eddie a couple questions about Vladislav Gavrikov, and now we move on. We're going to talk with Zach Martin of Locked On Canes. Obviously, the Rangers and the Canes striking a pretty rare inter-division blockbuster trade here between the two teams. K'Andre Miller goes to the Canes. The Rangers receive a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a defenseman prospect, Scott Morrow. So going to be talking with Zach about the K'Andre Miller trade from just about every conceivable angle. We're also going to have some questions for Zach about Scott Morrow and what kind of player we're getting there. And yeah, go ahead and enjoy this special crossover edition. All right, so with no further ado, let's go ahead and kick off this special crossover edition of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Carolina Hurricanes. John Chick with Locked On New York Rangers, joined by my good friend Zach Martin of Locked On Canes. And Zach, pretty rare occurrence this offseason here. We get what I would call a semi-blockbuster deal between two Metro Division rivals and, two teams that have been going back and forth for quite a few seasons here. It kind of came out of left field a little bit, at least the part where Miller ended up getting sent to the Canes. But I mean, look, the floor is yours, man. He's yours now. He's your new player. So I'm sure you got some questions about K'Andre Miller.
Yeah, no, definitely, John. Yeah, I appreciate the invite of doing this. Yeah, it's kind of crazy too when you think about it, because this isn't the first time the Rangers and the Hurricanes made some trades, because we all know about, the Hurricanes going to get Brady Shea and all that stuff. And it's very interesting how all that worked out. But yeah, so for K'Andre Miller, I know a lot of Hurricanes fans have seen a lot of takes looking at his numbers and stuff like that, even look at some of the analytical of his speed and all that. But what can Hurricanes fans really know about K'Andre Miller from someone who's covered him for basically most of his career until now?
So Miller, to me, I think is somebody that has had just kind of a very odd career trajectory, because when he first got to the Rangers, I mean, he was 20 years old when he made his debut, and granted a former first-round pick, so obviously there are high expectations there. But going into that season, I don't think too many people had Miller pegged to make the opening night roster, and he did that, and he's basically been in a top 4 role ever since. And I thought he got off to a great start. 2 seasons into Miller's career, and he's going into year 6 now, but 2 seasons into his career, I'm looking at Miller, I'm looking at Adam Fox, and I'm saying these guys are 2 of the pillars of Ranger hockey going forward, particularly when it comes to the defensemen. And at that point, I mean, sign me up for 10 plus years of these 2 guys, whether they're on the same pairing or not. They're certainly going to be on the roster. And then the last season or 2, I'm not really sure what happened. Miller was one of many, 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 many players on the Rangers last year that fell just light years short of expectations. It just felt like there were too many nights where the competitive fire just wasn't there from him. And again, he's not the only player on the Rangers where that description would be appropriate. But it's just kind of strange how he's fallen off the last year or 2 here, at least in the eyes of a lot of Ranger fans, myself included. And I think one way that I could really sum this up is, on my show, before all this came together, before free agency, before the trade, I threw out the idea of, well, maybe we extend K'Andre Miller just for 1 year. If we miss out on the Gavrikovs and the Provorovs of the world in free agency, we need to fill out this lineup somehow. Miller's at least been here. It's a bad season. We get him back for 1 year, and then we reassess after that season. And a lot of people that, watch the show or listen to the show, they did not like that idea at all. There were a lot of Ranger fans that were just ready to move on. And I think when you look at the return that the Rangers got for Miller, most people are feeling pretty good about it overall.
Yeah, no, that was really, for me, it was definitely out of left field, because we all didn't even really see that coming, because you're waiting for all these other moves to go down. And then for Hurricanes fans, like all they had so far was a sustained COVID extension. All of a sudden, okay, here's Miller to the Hurricanes. Like, okay, then you mentioned, the trade package as well. And it's very interesting when you look at, talking about Miller and how people felt about him. I know when you go and, watch, people around the league, NHL Network and a lot of, the big people from, the Athletic talk about him, some feel like that he has never really hit his ceiling with the Rangers, and they feel like that with how the Hurricanes play, it could be another situation where maybe it's just a fit thing or however it works out, because it's the same thing that happened with Shea. Rangers, I know from what I heard back at that time of that trade, Rangers are kind of like, okay, whatever, he's off to Carolina. It seems like it's the same thing for Miller, but do you feel like that maybe it's just a developmental thing or something just happened within the locker room that maybe it's just didn't work out, that maybe it could be different in Carolina for him?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there could be some of that going on for sure. I mean, when you look at the Rangers' recent track record when it comes to their homegrown player development, it's not the best. I mean, there are some success stories in there, but there's a lot of not so good stories as well. Case in point, you look at the year that Miller was drafted, they had 3 first-round picks. The other 2 were Vitaly Krasov and Nils Lundqvist, and it didn't work out with those 2 at all. Miller, at the very least, I mean, look, there was some good stuff with Miller. There's some Ranger fans that might have you believe otherwise, but like I said, this guy was in a top 4 role on this team. They did a lot of winning when he was here. 2 trips to the conference final, got within, a couple wins of making it to the Stanley Cup final on top of that. And again, looked like one of the building blocks on this team. But I think, Miller, like a lot of players on this Ranger team, whatever was going on in the locker room last season, it didn't seem to do him any favors. And like I said, the Rangers collectively just looked kind of checked out last year. I think what really kind of sold Ranger fans on this trade of K'Andre Miller was that it felt like last season in particular, there were just too many like loud mistakes in some critical spots in the game. Late in the game, up by a goal, tie game, in overtime, whatever it might be. That's when that would happen. With all that said, though, I mean, look, Miller has definitely shown some promise in this league. And when you look at the Canes, they have a pretty long history under Rod Brindamore. Their defensemen are legit. I mean, they bring in guys that they want to go out and get. And you mentioned the comparisons to Brady Shea. It could be a similar situation there where, they feel that this guy has not put his best foot forward yet and that they can get a little bit more out of him. I feel like, Kane's best days, Shea's best days, he was a far better player for the Canes than he was for the Rangers. And there could be some of that going on with K'Andre Miller. And to your point, Zach, I don't think the Canes are making this deal and giving up a first, a second, and a prospect unless they feel really, really good about his fit. I think the biggest challenge for the Canes and Rod Brindamore specifically is going to be pulling out that consistency from K'Andre Miller. Because when he's on and he's feeling it, I mean, he can be a good defenseman. And he did have some good seasons here. The year that they lost to Tampa in the conference final, no joke, man, he was like maybe the best defenseman for the Rangers in the playoffs that year. And I don't say that lightly when he shares a roster with Adam Fox, but he was phenomenal. And if you can find a way to kind of reignite that fire and pull that consistency out of him, then, I mean, I think that, this could pay dividends for you guys overall.
Yeah, no, I like you said, you look at what the trade was. It's, a conditional first, a second, and a prospect, and they gave him $7.5 million for the next 8 seasons. That's not a very late, we'll take a shot on this guy. It's like, no, they are thinking that he can be and the thing too is the Hurricanes put out a video of the behind the scenes of the trade, and Rod Brindamore literally said he reminds me of Brady Shea. So I think that's where a lot of the comparisons are at. But when you look at his game, I think a lot of people like kind of look at him being a big guy because he throws a lot of hits, blocks a lot of shots, but it seems like his stride and the speed are kind of like a little bit underrated. What can you say about just his footwork? And like you said, it seems like his stick work, his frame, his just overall aspect of what he can do is next level. What could you really explain about that maybe people haven't really seen or maybe don't understand?
Yeah, he's got good mobility, and there's times where he can jump into the rush and contribute that way as well. We've also seen him, on the second power play unit from time to time. And I mean, the Rangers' second power play unit barely plays, but he's out there, in the rare instances that they are on the ice. But it's funny. That was another area of his game that I think kind of took a little bit of a dip this past season when you look at his offensive numbers. Because again, man, I mean, this guy looked like the total package when he debuted, and he was going to be one of these do-it-all defensemen, chipping in a lot of different ways. And it's funny. I mentioned earlier that, the fire wasn't always there. One thing I'll throw out here that's kind of random, but I think you'll appreciate this. If there's ever a way to get Keandre Miller going, because I've seen this multiple times, if anybody messes with your goalie, the light bulb just kind of snaps on for Keandre Miller, and the fire comes back, and he's playing with intensity the rest of the game. There have been a couple times, even last year when he struggled, where somebody would like accidentally on purpose fall down on top of Igor or Quick, and he would just jump on them right away. So, that fire is in there, man. It's just, like I said, I think the biggest challenge is just finding a way to pull it out of him on a night-by-night basis. And the Canes do seem to have a good culture. There's a lot of accountability in that locker room. A lot of those guys have been playing together for a long time. And, maybe Miller being just slightly uncomfortable, being the new guy in the locker room again, that could be a good thing too, because that you don't have a ton of familiarity with these guys, and you don't want to be the guy that's kind of dragging, right? So, I think that could do him well. Additionally, just the fact that he's the new guy on a team and certainly doesn't want to let down his new teammates.
Right. So, yeah, it could be a change of scenery situation where it just works out for both sides, because the thing with the Hurricanes is the fact, like you said, culture and those guys in the locker room. You're talking about Jordan Stahl, Sebastian Aho, Jordan Marnick, and even Jacob Slavin, who's the number one guy in Carolina, especially on the defense. And you also got Tim Gleason, former Hurricanes defenseman and Stanley Cup winner as well, who's really kicking in the gear with those guys. So there is definitely a lot of expectations in that room. And more importantly, too, when you get a nice contract like that for 8 by 7.5, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of expectations for a guy like that.
I was going to say, how do you feel about the contract? How do you feel about the trade as a whole? Like, is this cool with you? Are you excited about this? Or did you think that it was maybe just a little bit too much? Just curious to hear, your perspective on that from the Canes side of things.
I'm actually kind of excited for it, because I've always liked Keandre Miller's game, even with the dip last year. I think just overall it was just a tough year for the Rangers in general, because I actually had you guys finishing first last year just because based off the season before, and it was definitely a surprise. But I think getting him, he's 25, he's got that, he does have an offensive side to him, but he's, like, from looking at his numbers, isn't afraid to put his body on the line, throw some hits as well. He's probably the most physical guy on the defense. So, and the contract-wise, I mean, you got him for 7.5. That's pretty good, all things considering your entire defense is $7.5 million or less. Can't go wrong with that. It's just, you're taking a shot on him, and if they remind him of what Brady Shea did, if he has a better offensive upside or just an overall better ceiling than what you had with the defense last year with Dmitry Orlov and Brent Burns, I'm excited for it. I'm always excited to see what a new guy can do in Carolina, especially if they believe in him that much. Why not? Be optimistic and just enjoy the ride, and hopefully it works out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually something I wanted to ask you about, too, as it pertains to Miller, because obviously, Orlov walks, Brent Burns walks. Is that part of the reason why they went after Miller, or do you think that this was going to happen anyway? Like this, because just the impression I got from this and everything that was being reported, like Keandre Miller was their guy. Like they weren't going to stop until they got this guy in a Canes jersey. And when those rumors kicked up that the Rangers were going to trade him, in division, that really made my eyebrows go up, because Drury doesn't even like to trade in conference. And it was like, okay, we must be getting like quite the return here, and that ends up being the case. So, just your thoughts, like was the idea that they had to replace those guys that were leaving, or were they going to attack him pretty much no matter what happened here?
I think they were going to go after him regardless, just because of the fact that with Burns being 40, Orlov having an okay year, but obviously was still looking for a big contract because he got a 2 by 6.5 for San Jose. So I feel like, they saw what they had in those guys, and they feel like they just want to get a little bit younger, a little bit faster, and that's what they did, because they got Alexander Nikisha coming back for, his first full season in the States, and now you just add Miller's 25, who, from a lot of people think, has a higher ceiling, more off offensive stride, and the fact that he's just a younger guy who's got a little bit more speed. I think that's just something that the Hurricanes wanted to do. They got younger, quicker, and they feel like they're in a lot better spot overall as a defense too. So definitely makes it interesting, but I don't think it's a pivot move off of Orlov and Burns' thing. It's just, hey, if we can get younger and get a guy that we can build around for the future, why not go make that move?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And something that you've kind of alluded to a couple of times here, and I'll agree with it, like comparing Miller to Shea, because it is something of a similar situation there. I would completely agree. I think Miller has a higher ceiling than Shea. And again, I do think Shea ended up being a better player for the Canes than he typically was for the Rangers, and that's a credit to the coaching staff and the other players there and the whole 9 yards. But I do think, despite what happened this past season, despite it being a down season for Miller, I would say that he probably has the higher ceiling of those two players. So going to be very, very interesting to see how it plays out. That is for sure.
Yeah.
But we'll keep everything rolling just a second. Zach, I want to ask you a couple of questions about Scott Morrow. Obviously, the Rangers, one of several assets that they got in the K'Andre Miller trade, and we will do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you are also building wealth. We've all had that situation before where the expenses just kind of pile up out of nowhere. You know, you take your family to a Ranger game, you go out to eat for dinner, you go on a vacation. It can happen. It can happen pretty quickly. But the bottom line, you need to take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. All right, we'll go ahead and keep everything rolling on this very special crossover edition of Locked On Rangers and Locked On Canes. And for the everydayers, you know, I'm sure both shows going to be continuing to cover all the wheelings and dealings going on and everything happening this offseason leading into the preseason and ultimately the regular season as well. But, you know, Zach, I want to go ahead and get a couple of questions answered on Scott Morrow, who obviously he's not the household name that K'Andre Miller is, but still somebody that is certainly a promising young prospect. And something that I've found kind of interesting with Morrow is that I've seen it both ways. I've seen certain people who think that he was among the Canes' best prospects. There was an article in The Athletic back in January that I forget the author, but he had him at number 1 as far as the Canes prospects. Then there's other people, Canes fans and whatnot, that seem to think that it's not really any big deal here. But how would you assess it? What is it like to lose Scott Morrow? Like, does this feel like an important player? Or does it kind of feel like, we got our guy, it'll be fine? Just your assessment on that.
I would say one is kind of tough when you look at when you just brought Alexander Nikishin over, who was the best defenseman in the KHL for the last 3 years. So I would kind of put him as your number 1. Then you kind of look at Bradley Nadeau, who's like probably the best pure goal scorer that the Hurricanes have in their system right now. I mean, he had over 30 goals in the American Hockey League last year, and he's one of very few guys that young to do that. So I would put Morrow probably more in the top 3 of prospects if you're going to talk about those two guys. I mean, even Jackson Blake, who was considered a prospect going into the season, I mean, he had a great year overall, so I would consider him a prospect. So I would say Morrow is probably definitely top 3, maybe I would say at the worst top 5 if you want to add some other guys in the system. But you look at someone who did pretty good at UMass in the 3 years he was over there. I mean, you're talking 33 points, 31 and 30 in the 3 seasons he was over there. I mean, he's, had 13 goals one season. It's like you're talking 37 games, 35 games, 37 games. That's pretty close to almost a point per game guy every year in college for UMass. And you're talking a defenseman here. And like I said, he doesn't put up a ton of goals. He had 13 one season, but he had 20 assists in every year. Then you look at the Chicago Wolves this past year. I mean, 13 goals, 39 points in 52 games, and then played some, for the Hurricanes a little bit too, 14 games. Did pretty well overall considered. And, I think the playoffs were a little bit of a tough match for him because you're looking at a guy who came in kind of later into the, in the postseason because the Hurricanes unfortunately got decimated with injuries going into the Eastern Conference Final where you lose Sean Walker and Jalen Chatfield. So you got Morrow and Nikishin kind of getting thrown in there against the Florida Panthers. And unfortunately, those guys got exposed. But I think overall, Morrow's got a good game to him. Like, you're talking about a guy who's got some, some good away play, does, find a way to get some good pace. Someone who is good on looking at breaking down plays, knows how to drag the guys in the right direction, has a good shot. And he's very deceptive on the offensive side of things as well. And the thing is, he's a right shot defenseman, 6'2", 194, and he's only 22 years old. So there's a lot of more ceiling to this guy. I mean, he's still super young. And I think that given the right circumstances of how things work out, I think he will be a good defenseman. It's just, and I always say this, if you want to trade for goods, you're going to have to give up good in the process back. And just even looking at the behind the scenes video that the Hurricanes did in the getting Keandre Miller, like it was Eric Tulsky that said, hey, we think it could be a first, a second, and Morrow. So they knew, like, hey, if we want to make this move with the Rangers and Drury, we might have to give up someone. And if we got to send a defenseman back, Scott Morrow is right now, he was the best defensive prospect for the Hurricanes outside of Alexander Nikish. And so I wouldn't say one, but I wouldn't say it was a complete whatever. I would still say this is a top 5 prospect in the organization.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a great saying that, what was it again? To get good, you have to give up good, right?
Oh, yeah. If you want to get good, you have to give up good. Yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah.
Something I got to ask about Morrow too. It's funny. We actually just did an episode over here where taking a look at Gabe Perreault, and obviously he joined the Rangers late last season, ends up playing 5 games, former first-round pick, and now the debate is sort of, should he start in the NHL this upcoming season, or do you have him play a couple of games in the AHL and let him get his feet wet with pro hockey a little bit? And I kind of prefer the latter with him. I feel like maybe I'm in the minority, but where do you think things are with Morrow? Now he's played 16 total games the last 2 years in the regular season. And, I think a case can be made either way. And certainly Morrow is going to have some say in it, depending on how he does in the preseason and training camp and everything. But in your opinion, is he ready to be a full-time NHLer, or is he somebody that could benefit maybe from just even a little bit more seasoning in the AHL? Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I would say definitely some seasoning in the AHL, because that's how I saw it going into the season for the Hurricanes, at least, because even I was looking at like potential guys outside if they didn't get Keandre Miller, like maybe is it Rasmus Anderson? Is it someone else in free agency that's a defenseman? That, like I was even looking at Gavrikov, which I thought would be a great addition for the Hurricanes. Unfortunately, goes to you guys, so there it is on that one. But so even then, I still had Morrow kind of starting the American League, because you don't want to put him as your 7th defenseman when he's 22. Like you're not really helping the guy out very much.
Right.
So could he make the jump into the defense if the Rangers really think if he has a solid camp and just shines and just does all the things that the Rangers want? I could see him being slotted into like the 3rd D pair just to kind of ease him in a little bit. I wouldn't say put him in the top 4. I'd say keep him as your third pair right shot, right defenseman, and then just ease him in and see how it goes. If they feel like he needs more time down with Hartford, then I'd say, yeah, go for it. Just have him some time in the AHL, because I thought he might start down there for the Hurricanes, because with all the guys they have right now, I think that was kind of be something that might have happened already with him going back to the Chicago Wolves. So, like I said, it could be AHL if they feel like that's the best course, or if he really shines. Wouldn't be upset if he went 3rd D pair if they think the Rangers think that's a good spot, just to kind of work him into the system a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And like I said earlier, and I think you would agree, Zach, the player himself is going to have the most to say about that. And I'm sure there's going to be some training camp battles with the Rangers, and we'll see how everything shakes out. But I got to ask you about this, too, because, Rangers and Canes, they're 2 teams that up until last season, they were maybe cumulatively the 2 best special teams in the NHL. And the Canes still were, but the Rangers fell apart in that area. So I'm wondering, and again, the Rangers' second power play, at least under the previous regimes, does not play very often. We know the top power play unit is going to be quarterbacked by Adam Fox, but can Morrow be that dude? Like, if he was to make the Ranger roster, can he be the defenseman on the second power play unit? Because right now, there's no obvious choice. Keandre Miller is with you guys. Zach Jones is with the Sabres. So, could Morrow be that guy, and could that even help his chances of potentially making the team?
I really think he can, because, like I said, how he played in Chicago, they had him on the power play, and it's down there as well. So, if the Rangers feel like that he could be that quarterback for PP2, I wouldn't blink at it. I'd be like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Because, like I said, he does have the offensive ops. So, like I said, he knows how to score goals. He's done it in college. He did it in Chicago last year. Like I said, 13 goals for a defenseman, that's pretty dang good, all things considered. And you look at his point totals, 39 points in 50-some games for Chicago, and that's his first season in the pros. So, that's pretty good, all things considered. Well, how I feel about if the Hurricanes win that direction. Even if you look at back in his time with, prep schools and stuff like that, he played at Shawtuck St. Mary's. 48 points, 67 with 22 goals. I know we're talking very low prep, but goal scorers score. Guys who score goals. Like, you're not going to just not start scoring all of a sudden. I know it's a little bit different league, but I could see him definitely playing PP2. They think the Rangers feel like that's a guy who could do it. There's no other obvious choice.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I've got one more question about Morrow, and then we'll move on to some general offseason stuff. I know you got to be excited about the free agent signing of Ehlers just a couple of days ago there. Ehlers kind of lingered a little bit, but you got your guy there as well. But as far as Morrow goes, personality-wise, we don't know him personally, and he's only played 16 regular season games with the Canes. But the Ranger locker room was a mess this past season. How is he as far as like just overall personality? Just based on what you can tell, is this somebody that can step into a new locker room and feel comfortable doing so to the best of your knowledge?
I think from what I've heard is that a lot of the guys like Scott Morrow, he's a quiet guy, but knows how to, be fun and just do his job. And he just comes in and does what is asked of him. So I think from what I've heard in Carolina and what I've heard from, guys that I know in Chicago who cover the Chicago Wolves, at least everyone raves about him. Like I say, he's a great guy. He's a little bit quiet, but I mean, he's 22, first pro season overall in his career. So I think, it might take a little time for him to get comfortable, but he's someone who works really hard, has a great work ethic, and will just come and do his job. And it might just, just take some time to get used to it. But from what I've heard nothing but great things about him.
Gotcha. So we'll turn the page here and we'll turn our attention to some other offseason storylines involving both the Rangers and the Canes. Definitely going to ask Zach a little bit about Ehlers and whatever else we get into, and we're going to do all that good stuff in just a second. All right, and so going to go ahead and wrap up this special crossover edition of Locked On Rangers and Locked On Canes with a couple of, I guess just best of the rest kind of questions here. Some random thoughts to conclude today's episode. But Zach, I would imagine you were pretty excited about the Ehlers signing because not only was he one of the better free agents in this year's class, but we saw a lot of guys re-sign with their current team at the 0 hour, and then free agency begins, and you get that initial sprint. And at that point, Ehlers is far and away the best player, remaining in free agency at that point. And there he is. And then the Canes go out and get him, and they make it happen. He's with you guys now. How did you feel about the signing? Did you think they were going to get him? Did you think they were in on Ehlers?
Oh, I definitely thought they were on Ehlers because from what it sounded like, that it was Carolina right from the get-go. They were in on him. Of course, we all heard like Washington, Tampa Bay, Toronto. Like there was like teams coming out of the woodworks. And after we heard the deal went down, there was like 12 teams involved. Detroit was in there. Some of the Western Conference teams felt like that way too. But I was feeling good that hopefully it would work out, and thankfully it did. And that's not a bad contract. 6 by 8.5. You feel pretty good about it. Nickname is Fly. Unreal speed. I was looking at his like AHL edge stats, like absolutely bonker stuff. Like you're talking 85 to 95 percentiles on just speed. Shooting is in the upper 80s to 90s as well. Like he's got a very fast shot. It's very deceptive. And the fact that you look at like just watching some of his like highlights and just overall game tape, like this dude is just not afraid to go do the job and play a 200-foot game and just find a way to break up passes and start rushes, and then just goes 1-on-4 against guys and just has that shot that works out. So it felt pretty good. And it was kind of crazy too, like you said, where you see like, oh, Mitch Marner's the big fish. He's gone before July 1st. And you look at other moves that were going to happen. The thing was, apparently the Hurricanes were thinking on getting an Evan Bouchard, and then they pivoted over to Keandre Miller after, that the Oilers thought that the Hurricanes were going to threaten with an offer sheet. But then, it worked out. They got Ehlers. They've been looking for a top 6 guy for a long time, and now they got him, and seemed like he wanted to come to Carolina, and he felt the love from them right away. He's like, that's the first things he talked about was just right away, Carolina wanted me. I've known they wanted me for at least a couple trade deadlines now, and it kind of just finally worked out. And honestly, it's a great deal, great AAV, and I'm really excited to see what he can do. I would not be surprised if he's top line left wing and top PP1 right from the jump, just from like how his play is. I think he'll fit the system well, and I think he's just someone that everyone's gonna be very excited about in Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's the kind of player that, I don't think the Rangers were ever really in on him. Certain fans, I think it was more fan created than anything else, but some Ranger fans would throw out his name every now and then. But he is like the definition of a dude that I am not looking forward to my team playing against, especially now that he's on the Canes. And when you consider, his incredible speed that you mentioned a second ago and how dangerous and creative he is off the rush, I'm not sure there were more than 5 teams in hockey that struggled at defending the rush more than the Rangers did last season. That's something that they've got to shore up, because if they don't, I mean, Ehlers is going to eat them alive, and I'm sure you and other Canes fans would love that if that were to happen.
Honestly, I'm just really excited to see what he can do for the Hurricanes. I mean, for me, it's like I'm someone that's like, hey, whoever they're playing against it's going to be a great game to watch overall. I mean, yeah, we have that rivalry between the Rangers and the Hurricanes, which is always fun, and I think it's going to be very exciting games for sure. But I have to ask you, how do you feel about getting Gavrikov? Because I know a lot of people are kind of wondering if who's going to pick him up. I was all over the Gavrikov train since basically the playoffs, and even last year I thought he was a really great player. And then once you heard he was probably leaving, I'm like, ooh, that'd be a great addition for the Hurricanes. But ends up he goes to you guys, and then of course that leads to Hurricanes possibly getting Kendrick Miller. Like, did you feel like them getting Gavrikov kind of like forced that issue? Or do you feel like it was just like, no, we were going to get him regardless, and we'll figure out the roster from there? And then how do you feel about the Rangers getting the guy like that for the defense?
Yeah, I mean, I've come around on it. As far as like the Miller aspect of it, though, that happened pretty quickly. Once Gavrikov was signed and the ink was on the paper and everything, and he's a Ranger, there was a way, but the Rangers would have had to twist themselves into a pretzel to have Gavrikov and also keep K'Andre Miller. I think for sure you'd have had to trade Carson Soucy and open up some cap space that way, maybe even one other move as well. But it got to the point where once they had Gavrikov, I think they were just that much more comfortable with letting K'Andre Miller go, or I guess signing and trading him is what they, quite literally did. But I mean, one move I think definitely led to the other. I think that's fair to say. As far as the Gavrikov signing in and of itself, at first I was kind of lukewarm to it. My reasoning going into this free agency period was that, certain players, because it was kind of a thin free agent class, no disrespect to any of the UFAs this year, but it was a thinner class than some other seasons. And so the ripple effect of that is that guys end up getting paid probably more than they deserve, if we're being totally honest. Like the contracts end up longer, they end up more expensive, because if you want, a defenseman or you want a winger, there's only so many places you can go, and you got to fend off the other suitors for this player, and you end up with a really massive contract. But with all that said, and the other thing that really scared me was when I saw Provorov get, I think it was $8.5 million for
that was
8 years.
My goodness. Yeah. I think it's 7 or 8 years. Yeah. It was a really ridiculous contract. We're not even talking about the LA Kings and their contracts too, because my goodness.
Yeah.
So
that happened, and I'm thinking like, well, I mean, Gavrikov's a better player than Provorov. He's going to get more money, and I'm thinking like the Rangers are really going to go like really overboard with this. But then you see 7x7, and they did have to give him the full no move clause for the first 5 years. But I think they kind of use that as a bargaining chip and a way to keep that cap hit as manageable as possible. And then, I mean, and this applies to both Miller and Gavrikov, because people look at these contracts and it's like, geez, man, like that's a lot. But we've seen the NHL salary cap jump by leaps and bounds from one season to the next, and that's projected to basically keep happening. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, $7.5 million for Miller, that seems like a lot right now. $7 million for Gavrikov, that seems like a lot right now, and it's certainly not a small amount. But you'll feel the impact of that less with every passing year, because the salary cap is going to keep going up. So, look, I mean, again, I had my reservations. The other thing that I was thinking about was next year's free agent class, and do we got to make sure we have enough money to chase one of those superstars if they make it to free agency. But the bottom line, the Rangers needed a defenseman. They got maybe the best one available in this year's free agency class. Like, how upset about that can I possibly get, right? That's basically the long and short of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, like you said, like it was so small. You look at next year's class, and I even was looking at it too. I'm like, there is a lot of guys next year. You're kind of like, how much do you want to go in for 2025? If you're looking at 26, you got to find that balance of how much do you want to go in compared to, do you like take a step back a little bit? So yeah, it's definitely, it was a balancing act for a lot of these teams, more so than that. But as of right now, how do you feel about the Rangers offseason so far, and how do you feel about the team? I know it's only like, July, like early July. We're still months away. But how are you feeling right now for the Rangers offseason and possibly going into next year if this just stays pat, there's no other moves?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall it's been a good offseason. I know some people are upset about the Kreider trade. Other people are jumping for joy about it. I think the truth lies somewhere in between, where it was just probably time for this to happen, especially when you consider the Rangers need to open up some cap space. They were able to do that with the trade of Kreider. and Kreider just did not have one of his best seasons this year before. So they did that, and then obviously the Gavrikov pickup is nice. I think the Keandre Miller trade was good when you consider the return that they got. They did about as good as they could, is what I will say. Besides that, it's basically just ancillary moves. You add Darren Radish on a 2-year contract, and that's fine. I think he's a solid bottom sixer as well. But I also think, I mentioned the truth lying between two extremes. I think that's kind of where the Rangers are at right now. 2 years ago, President's Trophy, conference final, all that good stuff. Were they really the best team in the NHL? You probably would have to say no, because they got beat by the Panthers in the playoffs. I don't think they were nearly as bad as they were last year, though. Something in that locker room broke, and now you've got a new coach. It's a clean slate for everybody, and hopefully, these guys put the pieces back together and they find out. I think they're a playoff team next year. Are they one of the truly elite teams in the NHL? That remains to be seen. This is my 7th year doing this, and this is as unsure as I've ever been about how to feel about this team going into the upcoming season. And granted, there's some other things that could still happen between now and then, but for the most part, both these teams have their roster set. And Zach, I'll ask you the same question, man, because the Canes have been Rangers and Canes both kind of been knocking on the door the last handful of seasons. Not last year for the Rangers, but the years before that. So is there still a belief that eventually this is going to happen? Because it's been an outstanding team, a lot of longevity, a lot of success, a lot of winning, a lot of deep playoff runs. But is there still a belief among yourself and Canes fans they're going to kick the door down and they're going to do this thing? They're going to get to the final and they're going to win the whole thing.
It's kind of funny because when you look at social media, there's a lot of we're still, a couple moves away, or some people think we're going to be ready for next year. There is a lot of excitement across the board just because of the fact that you got Ehlers, you're kind of excited what Miller can do and stuff like that. And the fact that there's still the question of, is the goaltending elite? Is it going to be good enough? And the Hurricanes, is the 2C option good enough with Jesper Fast there? Because they got to address that situation. For me, I'm going into my second full season, but this is technically my 3rd year doing this for Locked On Hurricanes, because I had that short stint at the end of the 23-24 season starting in April. But I would say I've been enjoying what the Hurricanes have been doing this because you got your top 6 guy, Nikolaj Ehlers. He's really good. I'm really excited what he can do. Yeah, Miller is going to be it's a gamble move, but I like the fact that the Hurricanes are not afraid to go and make those moves. And, like I said, you had to give up some draft capital and, some prospects, which I said, hey, you have a plethora of it. Go use it. Why not? Go get better now. Don't just keep waiting for these prospects to show up. So I think overall I've been really excited to see what they do this year. Just the offseason was great. I'm excited to see what happens this year as well. And because I'm just always optimistic of just the Hurricanes, doing the thing. Because I'm just, like you said, 7 years of making the playoffs, 7 first-round wins, as a 2 Eastern Conference final appearances in the last 3 years, 3 in the last 7. So, yeah, I think it's just another year where the Hurricanes, I feel like they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to probably make another deep run. It's just, John, me and you both know, it's running through Florida. They are going to be the team to beat, and I think just the fact that they're bringing the whole band back together is going to be a daunting task for pretty much anyone. So it's right now it's the Eastern Conference against the Florida Panthers is what it feels like right now. But I feel like this, if there's a couple more moves they could do to get better, I think they can do it. Do I think that they are a better team now compared to last year? I would say yes for the most part, just because of the additions they've had. Now it's just seeing how it works out as the season goes along. So it'll be a very interesting for sure how it works out. But I do feel pretty good of where the Hurricanes are at. And maybe, like you said, for your Rangers, maybe there's a couple more moves that are going to happen before we know it, because you just never know with these teams, especially with these GMs.
Absolutely. And one more thing that I want to ask you about real quick here before we call it. Jesper Fast had to retire this offseason, obviously due to injury, but man, this is a guy that was absolutely beloved by Ranger fans, seemed to be beloved by Canes fans as well. Just a blue-collar, hardworking player. I did a best of Jesper Fast episode at some point this offseason when we found out that he was retiring. But just your thoughts on him and what he meant to the Canes. I mean, former 6th-round pick who had to scratch and claw for everything and really became a very important player to both of our teams.
Oh yeah, no, he is well loved in Carolina. I mean, big game-winning goal in the playoffs against the New Jersey Devils,
That was
and
awesome.
Oh, I mean, we might be rivals, but we'll definitely agree it's always going to be the New Jersey Devils. But
Amen to that.
But yeah, no, everyone loved him in Carolina. Great guy. I never really, unfortunately, never got to interview him when I was down there in the locker room. But just from what I've heard and just seen in general, like he is loved by that locker room, loved by the fan base, the front office. It's really unfortunate that gets hurt in a nothing game against the Jackets in the last game of the regular season in 23-24. Misses the playoffs, misses all last year. Now he's retired, and it's just sad to see for a guy like that to go out on that note. Rather, it's always good to see a guy go out on his terms and not due to injury, so it stinks. But I mean, I really enjoyed Jesper Fast. He was a great guy from just from the stories and just the content that he put out with the Hurricanes when he was asked to do it, and just a phenomenal player. And just gotta give him all the stick taps and just all the love that you can give, because he was great for you guys. I know he was an alternate captain at one point too, and he was loved down here in Carolina. So nothing but love and respect for Jesper Fast, and wish him nothing but the best in the next chapter of his life. And I just wish it was on better terms, but nothing but love for Quickie.
Yeah, amen to that. Just like I said, very hardworking, very popular player with both franchises. And on that note, Zach, I figure we can call it there, but this is a ton of fun like it always is. Thanks for discussing Miller and Morrow and everybody else and everything else. And we'll have to do this again sometime during the season. Yeah,
of course, Johnny. I'm always excited to talk to you, man. It's always great conversations between the both of us, just talking about the Rangers and their Hurricanes and all that good stuff. I'm definitely looking forward to doing it again this year. And who knows, maybe we'll see each other in the playoffs and have one of those famous playoff crossovers.
I mean, it can't go longer than like 2 years without these teams meeting in the playoffs, can it?
It's
already pretty much due, yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to be very long. I'll probably be seeing you in the playoffs again very, very soon. So
it's only a matter of time, my friend. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
All right, cool. So Ranger fans, Cane fans, thank you guys as always for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.